The young man, who was a dreamer of dreams, stood in front of his older brothers. And he was describing every detail of his most recent dream to them. He could see in their faces that they didn't really like what they were hearing. They didn't like any of his dreams. They already didn't like him for all the other reasons. He was his father's favorite. He was the favored son of the family. His father even gave him a beautiful tunic, a coat of many colors, a gift that was supposed to be a blessing. But when his brothers saw it, they just scowled. They made fun of him, everything that they could do, without harming him physically. Now he was not naive about it, but he kept having these dreams, and he almost impulsively he felt the need to tell his family, to tell his brothers about these dreams. And everybody seemed to understand what they meant, and he was sure of it as well. But he, first might have questioned, were they really from God? Were they real? Were they prophetic dreams? And we can find this story in Genesis chapter 37, as we see here. Joseph, the favored son of Israel. Genesis 37 and verse 3, we see where it describes how Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. Because he was the son of his old age. He was also the son of his favorite wife, the wife that he intended to marry. And there were others. He says, also he made him a tunic of many colors, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Just every word out of his mouth irritated them. Now, if you're an older sibling, you have younger siblings, you might understand that a little bit, but this was a little intense. Especially because these weren't children, these were young men. Some of them even a little bit older than you might call young men. Joseph himself was 17 years old at this point. Now these dreams were very vivid, very specific, and it seemed to be that his family, especially his brothers, would one day be bowing down before him. As he was in power, he would be in power over them. You can imagine for such a young man, these dreams and this favor from his father might have filled him with a great amount of pride. And sometimes it kind of seemed that it went to his head when he saw his brothers do something wrong. Instead of, being patient with them, he would run and tell his father. Now, one particular moment in this story, let's turn to verse 17 in Genesis 37. We see that Joseph is sent out to go check on his brothers. Verse 17, he runs across a man as he's searching for his brothers. He says, they have departed from here. The man says to Joseph, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. They were off doing something else when they were supposed to be taking care of the sheep. As usual, that's probably what Joseph was thinking. Verse 18, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. This hatred had grown so much that they wanted to kill their own brother, their little brother, who they were supposed to watch after him. And then then they said to one another, verse 19, look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of this dreamer. That's very harsh, and they made these plans. Thankfully, the eldest brother had some sense. He probably still hated his brother. He was there with them, with his other brothers, making fun of him, teasing him, hating on him. But he thought it was wise not to kill him. Let's not go that far. And so they made plans to at least hurt him a little bit, tease him, take his coat from him, stick him in a pit. So they did that. Now Reuben, the oldest brother, he wasn't happy with what his brothers wanted to do. He figured that if anything actually did happen to his brother, his father would come after him. He would have to answer for that as the eldest brother. But maybe a little bit he felt bad. We don't have all those details, but it seems that that he at least felt bad. So they made a plan. Well, as we see in the story, while Reuben was away for a moment, his brothers decided that they were going to sell him. They took his tunic. Verse 31 talks about this. They took his beautiful tunic. They killed a goat, a kid of the goats, and they dipped the tunic in blood. So they wanted their father to make it to think that he had been killed by an animal and he had died. In verse 32, then they sent the tunic of many colors and they brought it to their father. So they sold their brother off to a band of traders that was headed for Egypt. Joseph was gone at that point. Reuben comes back and he's upset, he's worried. So they say, okay, we have to cover it up. So they dip the tunic in blood and they show it to their father. And they don't outright say what happened. They want the father to make implications. Verse 32. So they brought the tunic to their father, and Israel here, he says, they said to their father, we have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not? As if they don't know. They're playing it up really well here. And he recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. That was one of his worst fears. And he believed it happened. Verse 34, we see his reaction. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And I'm sure his brothers felt terrible about that, but they'd already made their decision. There was mixed emotions. They were probably relieved that that dreamer couldn't get the best of them, or so they thought. Of course, we understand this story. Verse 35, and all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt. Those Midianite traders sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard. And so we find Joseph there in Egypt. Now this is a sad state of affairs that we see this family in. You know, family isn't supposed to be torn apart by pettiness and pride. Brothers aren't supposed to be at arms against brothers. But little did they know that God used this error, this sin, this mistake for his plans to save their lives and also to test their hearts. I've titled this sermon, Testing of the Favored Son. Testing of the favored son. We're going to look at some tests that Joseph went through in Egypt. Now the brothers had their own tests and trials as they did their own sort of mourning, eased of mind, but still torn at heart, knowing that they had lied to their father and assuming that their brother was dead. Meanwhile, Joseph is in Egypt, he himself being tested, put through trials. Now through these tests, we can see how he experienced life and how he made it through these tests. And we can also think of ourselves, how we make it through similar tests, our own, that God puts us through to see how we do, to see if we pass the tests, the spiritual tests, to examine our hearts, to look at our growth. Genesis 39. Genesis 39 and verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites. Ishmaelites, Midianites, it's the same group of people. The greater family were Ishmaelites, the tribe of Midian, or the land of Midian. The Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. So he bought them from these Ishmaelites, which actually were distant cousins. So cousins, selling cousins into slavery. Kind of interesting there. Verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. So we see that Joseph, he learned a thing or two. Hopefully learned from the mistakes of his brothers, but also he learned from his father to be diligent. And also we know that God blessed everything that Joseph put his hand to. And we'll see more of that as we go. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. He was in the house of the master, the Egyptian, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. Now these people, the Egyptians, didn't know the God of Jacob. Maybe they'd heard some stories, some of the miracles in distant history. But they could see that there was something different about this man and the God that he worshipped. He didn't worship the Egyptian God. So the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house and all that he had put under his authority. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of the house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house. So his whole household, everything that Potiphar decided to do, if he put Joseph in charge, it was a success until his whole household was successful. And it was for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Now this gives us a detail, physical description of Joseph. A handsome young man, at this point maybe 18, an actual adult now, but he's working diligently. And all that Potiphar has to worry about is the food that goes from his plate into his mouth. Can you imagine not having to worry about anything else, but still having your health? That's how Potiphar was. Now this leads us into the first test that Joseph experienced. Joseph earned the trust of this important man, this Egyptian, the captain of the guard. And as we see, he was very successful. Potiphar trusted him with everything. And he gave him access to everything in his household, as we see, except for his wife. And Joseph was okay with that. It wasn't his own wife, it was Potiphar's wife. But we see this test coming. Verse 7, and it came to pass, after these things, that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, this handsome young man, and she said, lie with me. It wasn't against her religion. Joseph had to make a decision here. He had to decide who he was loyal to. This is a test of loyalty. Joseph's loyalty was tested. So this is the first test here. He had to make a decision. Now he could have lain with Potiphar's wife, and they could have covered it up and gone on with things as long as she didn't care to tell anybody, and he didn't care to tell anybody. But God put Joseph in this situation to test his loyalty, to see if he was loyal to this master who had trusted him, but ultimately to see if he was loyal to God. In verse 8, we see, of course, that he passes this test. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There's no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you're his wife. Now this, Joseph understands the importance of marriage. He's also seen in his own family the chaos that happens when a man has multiple wives. He understands that. He doesn't want to mess with that. He saw the things that it did to his family, to his father, his mother. Well, his mother had died, his brothers. And he says, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? How could he sin against God? He knew God. He'd learned who God was. And it seems he even had a personal relationship with God. It's not enough just to know who God is and what he expects of us, but to have a personal relationship with him. So much so that you understand that anything that you do against him is personal. Even if we sin against somebody else, it's personal to God. Joseph understood this. He had a deep loyalty, deeper than to his master. He had a deep loyalty to God. And he shows this here, so he passes the test. He'd seen how God had spared his life. In this moment, he was trusting that God would keep him safe. He knew that God was mightier than any master that he would have, any woman that might, harm his reputation, even mightier than any of the gods that the Egyptians worshipped. He knew his God was the most powerful, the only real God. In verse 10, we see this wife of Potiphar. She's trying to dig in. This didn't just happen once. This was every chance that she got. she's trying to bring that test over and over again. And so that test continued for a while. Verse 10, so it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day, every day, at least once a day, that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment. Now, this is the second garment that is taken from him. And she grabbed his garment, his tunic that he was wearing, and she said, lie with me. But he ran away. That's a great example. If anybody tries to catch you in adultery, fornication, wants to bring you into it, run away. Run away. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, flee fornication. Goes right along with this. Run away from it. Don't get involved in it. It's messy. It's a sin against God. It's a sin against your own self, your family. Run away with it. So he ran outside and the garment was left there. He didn't care though. And so it was when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, an idea came to mind. She said, I can get him into trouble. If he won't take me, I'm going to get rid of him. So she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, see, he has brought into us a Hebrew to mock us. He came into me, which we know was a lie, to lie with me. And I cried out with a loud voice, which didn't happen. And it happened when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. And so she kept his garment with her until his master came home. She's going to try to convince her husband of the evidence. She has the tunic there, whatever it is, the garment. And so we see Joseph, I almost called him Joshua. Joseph, too many names here. Joseph, his loyalty was tested time and again. And even in that moment, he passed the test. Now our loyalty is tested often. It might be a situation like Joseph was in, but it might be a completely different situation. It's easy to, I think overall it's easy to remain faithful to God when other people are around. And there was even that moment where Joseph, was alone with this woman, this temptress, this temptation here. Sometimes, I think most of the time, it can be easy to be faithful to God, loyal to God when other people are around. Sometimes it's because we worry what other people think of us. Sometimes it's even because we gain strength, encouragement from each other, which is a good thing. But our loyalty is often tested when nobody else is around. It's just us and God. In that moment, our loyalty is tested. And God constantly tests our loyalty through obedience. Now, he doesn't just give us a list of things to do to test us. He gives us a way of life to live so that we don't fall into sin, so that we can have life rather than death. He's trying to see if we are developing that true godly character, that integrity, that loyalty to him. When we sin, it is against our God. And it doesn't help to build that relationship with him. And we want to build that relationship. And so we are often tested, our loyalty to God, through our obedience. So we keep that in mind with the choices that we have to make in life. And now we come across a second test that Joseph was put through, a second test here. In Genesis 39, as we continue on here with the story, verse 19, so it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. It's understandable. Here he has his wife. He trusts Joseph more than anybody, and maybe he trusts his wife a little bit more than that. And so he's loyal to his wife, which, that's understandable. He doesn't know the whole story. And he was angry against Joseph. Then Joseph's master took him, verse 20, and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in the prison. This is the royal prisoners. There might have been all kinds of individuals here. Some, that had done great evil against the Pharaoh. And some that maybe just made the Pharaoh angry. But Joseph is placed here. And could you imagine being put into prison for something that you didn't do? And you know that you didn't do it. Not just like, well, maybe it wasn't that bad, but that you didn't do it and you were put into prison. And Joseph didn't even get a chance to defend himself. It wasn't that kind of place. Their justice was, well, if the master says that you're guilty, then you're guilty. If the Pharaoh says that you're going to die, then you're going to die. So he didn't have a chance to defend himself. Now maybe the truth eventually came out. We don't know. Or maybe it was when Potiphar eventually saw Joseph rise in power above himself that he began to question his wife. Who knows? But Joseph was in there, in the prison. And his faith was tested. So this is a test of Joseph's faith, that God would again take care of him. A belief that God would fulfill his dreams, those prophetic dreams that he had given him. Because there were probably moments where he's sitting in prison wondering, has God forgotten me? Has he turned his back from me? Now Joseph, another thing about Joseph in this situation, he could have screamed and shouted and tried to get his opinion across. Now that gets into another text later. Joseph was smart about things. He also could have withdrawn himself and said, you know what, I'm the only Hebrew in here. I'm the only one of the Israelites of my family in here. Everybody else is going to look poorly upon me, even the other slaves potentially. He could have hid away, maybe asked for isolation or something like that. But he knew that he was there to do something special. God was bringing him along, and this is a test of his faith. And so he just began to serve like he always did, like he did in Potiphar's house. He began to serve. And he, no doubt, still wondered, would God in fact bring these dreams to pass? But he had that faith. This is a test of his faith. Let's go to verse 21 in this same chapter here. He had to have complete faith that God would continue to bless him. He'd even see those blessings. And when we receive great blessings, it helps boost our faith, even in really tough times. Verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. God allowed the keeper of the prison to see his good reputation, that he was honest, that he was honorable, and that he was willing to serve and loyal. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. And so he was in charge of the whole prison, just under the keeper of the prison. I don't know if he could go in and out, but he knew everybody who came in and went out, and probably managed all the food, the sleeping arrangements, whatever it might be. He knew everybody. In verse 23, the keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. So we see Joseph passes that test of remaining faithful to God, and not just sitting there and being scared, but continuing to obey, continuing to serve, which is a great example for us. What do we do if we are scared, if we think somebody has put us in a place and we could possibly die, or we've been accused of something wrongly? Do we trust God, and do we continue to maintain our integrity and remain faithful to God? That's a great example for us. Our faith is often tested. It's tested in moments where we think it might be hopeless. Sometimes in those moments we begin to shut down a little bit. We begin to sometimes isolate ourselves, or sometimes we lash out and we start complaining to other people. Sometimes we begin to question God. Sometimes we might even become bitter and angry at people around us because of our situation. Because we don't see how things are going to play out. We don't see the end result immediately. But in those moments, do we remain faithful to God and keep our integrity and continue to be obedient? Do we put our faith into action as we see described in the Bible? James chapter 2, James writes there that faith without works is dead. We have to put our faith in action no matter where we are. Even if we have the worst job in the world, Do we do that job diligently? Think of Joseph. He had a terrible job, but he did that job diligently. And that's part of our test of our faith. Do we do our work diligently, knowing that God sees what we do and how we interact with people? Do we have faith enough to know that God is a rewarder of those who believe in him and trust in him? There's a scripture for your notes, 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. 1 Peter chapter 2, 19 and 20. Peter writes that it is commendable if, because of conscience toward God, we endure grief, suffering wrongfully, like Joseph did. He wasn't guilty. He endured grief because of that. That doesn't mean that we can't stand up for ourselves, but sometimes we endure grief, wrongfully accused. Verse 20, 1 Peter 2 says, "For what credit is it if when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? When you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God." Now again, that doesn't mean that we just go and, hide away and don't tell anybody the truth. But sometimes we are punished for doing the right thing, and that's commendable before God. If we're punished for doing the wrong thing, that's on us. That's our own fault. But God tests our faith in him, knowing that he will bring us blessings. He will bring us through, but he wants to see if we will remain faithful to him, regardless of what situation we're in. So that was the second test, the test of faith that Joseph went through. Now we come across a third test. There were two officers who served under Pharaoh that were in this prison. They were in very important positions. Now, in the world that they lived in, it meant that if they angered Pharaoh, even if it was something that was a normal thing, maybe they just tripped and fell, and dropped something. If Pharaoh was angered, they were sent to prison, and sometimes even put to death. And that's what happened. These two men were placed in the same prison that Joseph was in. And we see God's hand begin to work here. Part of the duties of Joseph was to watch over and care for the other prisoners. And it seems that he was good at it. And these prisoners wanted to come and talk to him, to counsel with him, to tell him their problems. And he seemed to be attentive to their needs, very much so. Now, it would have been easy for him to just, go on with his work and not care about the prisoners individually, but he cared about them as human beings, part of humanity. He wasn't in there, to be angry and kick people or hurt them. Even these potentially evil men who might have done some terrible things. So here we see a test of Joseph's kindness, or you could say a test of his love, his care for other people. His kindness was tested. His ability to be kind even in a difficult place, dealing with difficult people. That's a huge test for a lot of us, a lot of times. Genesis chapter 40, verse 5. We'll start with verse 5. "Then the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had a dream, both of them." And we see God beginning to work here. Joseph was paying attention too. He knew that God worked in dreams. He'd experienced that himself. It said each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. They were different dreams with different interpretations. And Joseph came into them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. So he's paying attention to these fellow prisoners. He saw that they were sad. And so he asked them. "What's wrong? Why do you look so sad today?" And they began to explain. And we see this extra touch of kindness by Joseph. What a nice example, a good example. He was extra kind, even to these men that he might not have known before. He probably didn't know them before. And we know God was using these men for his purposes. He put them in there and given them dreams. And I think Joseph realized that when he found out they were upset over dreams. Dreams was one of his specialties. God had given him the ability to interpret dreams, and he gave that credit to God. He was humble and kind, both together. Verse 8, "And they said to him, 'We each have had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it.'" Nobody else could figure out what these dreams meant. Maybe they'd asked around a little bit, and they asked each other, and they didn't know what it meant. So Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God?" So he took it to God. He's an advocate for the truth. He's an advocate for righteous living. He's an advocate for God's power, even over dreams. "Tell them to me, please." And they trusted him. They trusted him. And Joseph was truthful with these interpretations. That's part of the kindness, actually. It's kind to be truthful with people. Now, he could have said, "Well, that's too bad for you. You're going to die. You're going to live." But he was kind with these individuals as he explains the truth. One of them would be delivered, and one of them would not be. The butler, he would be restored to his former position under Pharaoh. And the baker would die. He would die by hanging. And we see Joseph being kind to these strangers, and I'm sure extra kind to that man who was going to die, taking the time to help them in their moment of need, even in this difficult place, even dealing with difficult people at times. Now, our kindness is often tested. How often do we have the opportunity to be kind to people and we don't take it? And I'm not necessarily saying that, everybody who's begging out there on the streets, we just walk around giving them cash or giving them food all the time. We can't possibly take care of everybody out there. We take care of who we can, but do we choose to be kind to people even if they are not kind to us? Sometimes, we see injustices and we begin to be angry and we start acting angrily. Whereas if we act kind, even if somebody else has wronged us, the situation is going to work out a lot better for us than if we were angry. If we're kind, it's easier to have a conversation with somebody who is upset. The Proverbs say that a soft answer turns away wrath. I don't have that one in my notes, but it's in there. A soft answer turns away wrath. God is patient with us as well. And that's the ultimate example of kindness. God is patient with us. He is kind to us, even though we don't deserve it. Even though sometimes we're angry at him. Or sometimes we do the wrong thing. So many times we do the wrong thing. But God is patient and kind with us. And we are supposed to be becoming like him. Does that also include kindness, which is part of that presence of God within us through his Spirit? That's our test of kindness. There are many opportunities to be kind to one another, to people that we like and people that we don't like. Because there might be people that you don't like. I don't know. I'm not going to go around and ask you if there are people that you don't like, or who they are. I'm just going to assume that you're going to be kind to those people as well. And somebody might never know that you don't like them if you're kind to them. And then maybe you will like them because they'll be a little bit kinder to you as well. Now we come across the next test that Joseph has put through, the fourth test, if you're keeping track of numbers here. The fourth test. We see Joseph giving the chief butler, his last words spoken to him. As he's leaving, he wants him to remember him. Remember that kindness that I showed you. See if you can show me some kindness when you get out, now that your life has been saved. Chapter 40, Genesis chapter 40, as we continue on here in verse 14, he says, "But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me, make it mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house." Now sure, he had great privileges in prison, but he really wanted to also be out of prison. And he didn't know what God had in store for him exactly, but he knew that God was still working with him. And he saw this opportunity, and perhaps realized that God had placed this opportunity within his grasp. And so he asked this individual, this butler, for some kindness. In verse 15 he says, "For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon." He's innocent. Now, he's never done anything wrong in the prison, and so this butler seems to, he has no reason to believe otherwise, that he's innocent. Now, in the butler's excitement, he's restored back to his position. He forgot about Joseph for a minute. What a shame. He went back to work. He was happy. Probably, I don't know if Egyptians whistled while they worked, but I imagine him doing that, going and, butlering for Pharaoh again, back to his usual life, and he's happy. He has life. He has a second chance at everything, and he's going to try not to do anything to mess that up. But for a moment, he forgets about Joseph, actually a long while. Now, this is a test of patience for Joseph. He had to be patient. There are times where he saw God's hand working very quickly, very diligently, but so many times where he had to wait to see how God was going to work the situation. What was God going to do? And he ended up being in prison a while longer. God has his own timing in things. Joseph had to learn that. God's timing is not always our timing. Mostly it's not our timing. But God has very precise timing, and he considers so many different factors in his timing. We can speculate that if Joseph had gotten out of prison immediately, that maybe he would not have had that success. Maybe he would have just been out on the street with the normal people in Egypt. Or maybe he would have been a laborer, who knows. But here, God had provided him the perfect timing to have an opportunity to work for Pharaoh, the guy at the top in all of Egypt, nobody else higher than him. And he was even considered a god by the Egyptians, so there's nobody higher than him. So Joseph's patience was tested here until the right time. Now, our test of patience happens often, a lot. Patience is a funny thing, I think. I think for many of us it comes and goes. Sometimes I think of myself as a very patient person, but then I get upset over something minor, something stupid. I think, what happened? Do a little bit of self-talk. Lewis, what are you doing? What happened here? And we're often patient for a little while. It's easy to be patient for a little while. It's easy to be patient the first time if somebody comes to us with some trouble or whatever it might be. The struggle comes in when we have to suffer for a long time. And as we know, one of the fruit of God's Spirit is long-suffering. It's that enduring patience. Our suffering through difficult situations, even the presence of certain people. Hopefully it's not, we don't think of it as suffering. So I like the word patience more than I like the word suffering. It's a little bit easier to take. But pride is an enemy in patience. Pride is an enemy in all things, but specifically with patience, pride makes us think that we have better things to do than to help take care of somebody or endure through a difficult situation or to continue to do a good job when things get tough in life. Pride creeps in, and we think that our time is more important than somebody else's. Or in some cases, some people think that their time is more important than God's time. I think the Sabbath is a good test for us in that. This is God's time. 24 hours. It's holy time. We aren't supposed to do our own thing. We get delight in doing God's thing. Pride can tell us otherwise. Now with patience, here's a memory verse for us, Romans chapter 8, verse 28. This should help us remember in those times where we begin to be impatient that God is working something out. If we're patient and waiting for his time, he's going to make it better for us in the long run. Romans 8, verse 28 says, And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Not our own purpose, but God's purpose, his timing, his plans. And he's going to take care of us. And he works together for our good. But it takes patience on our part, waiting for God's time. Letting go of control over things that we don't have control over. There are so many things in life that we would be a lot happier about if we let go and let God take care of the situation, fight our battles, rather than being angry and impatient. But of course, that's easier said than done, but our patience is often tested. Now we get to the fifth test that Joseph went through. By the way, there are 6, if you're wondering. I thought about adding a 7th one, but it's okay. Now, Joseph's reputation for being an interpreter of dreams was known. It preceded him at least a little bit, when the butler remembered him. So the butler forgot for a while, but then he finally remembered Joseph's kindness. And he said, oh, I have to show him that kindness. Let me go tell the Pharaoh. And that act of kindness, the miracle of interpreting the dream which God gave to him, allowed this simple young man to be brought before the Pharaoh, as we know. Genesis 41, verse 9 here. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day. It's like he woke up one morning, he's like, oh yeah, that one guy. What's his face? Joseph. That's right. Now, Pharaoh was angry with his servants, and he put me into custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. And he's telling this story. We each had a dream, and one night, he and I, each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now this is coming up because Pharaoh had his own dreams. He had two different dreams, and nobody could interpret these dreams. But the butler knew somebody who could. Verse 12, now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream, and it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us. So it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. Then Pharaoh, he sent for Joseph quickly. These dreams were really bothering him, and he took him out of the dungeon, gave him a shave, changed his clothes, and he came before Pharaoh. He had to be presentable as an Egyptian. Thankfully, that butler gave credit to Joseph. Now, interestingly, we see a third change of clothes here. As Joseph continues on, each blessing seems to come with a change of wardrobe there. Now, Pharaoh, he brought Joseph before him, and he begins telling him this dream very vividly. If we had time, we'd go through it, but essentially, he had dreams of these heads of corn that devoured other heads of corn, and these cows that devoured other cows, but they were still weak. He was looking at famine, and then also later plenty, or maybe it was the other way around. Plenty and then famine would come. That's right. Should have just read it. All right, let's read verse 32. Now we see that Joseph explained the dreams, and he explains to Pharaoh that he should do something about it. And he mentions that the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God. He gives God the credit of the interpretation of the dream. And he also shows that it is God's hand that is bringing this about. And God will shortly bring it to pass. And so he knows that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Now the test comes in here, a test of Joseph's wisdom. A test of Joseph's wisdom. Because Joseph could have said, you know what, you have to put somebody in charge of gathering grain, and you can make some money off of it. He did mention those things. And he could have said, I'll do it, I'm the best man for the job. But he knew, this is where the wisdom comes in, he knew that if he would have said something like that, the Pharaoh would have said, no, you're just a dreamer, go back to prison. I don't trust you anymore. You're just trying to connive, you're trying to get some prestige, some power from me. He doesn't say that. Pharaoh saw this wisdom in him, his patience. He wasn't even trying to give the job to himself. And Pharaoh gave him the job and put him in charge, second in command over all of the country, only under himself. In verse 37, the advice that Joseph gave to Pharaoh was good in Pharaoh's eyes and in the eyes of all his servants. They said, it's a good idea. We wouldn't have even thought of this. We didn't even know what the dream was about. This is what we're going to do. They're going to save up some grain. Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Again, they don't know his God, but they see that his God is working in him. And he has that power, his God dwelling within him. His words are from God. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. So Pharaoh picks him out. He says, you shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. So Joseph passed that test of wisdom. He was inspired by God, and he came to understand the fact that God was doing these things. And like I mentioned, he could have volunteered himself, but he figured maybe Pharaoh would put me back into prison if I tried to take the job myself. And so in his wisdom, he knew when to say what and when not to say anything. And that is deep wisdom. That's a good example for us. It takes wisdom. Our test of wisdom comes when we have to know when to speak up and when not to say anything. And that can be difficult. And we gain certain wisdom through experience in life. Sometimes we stick our foot in our mouth, say something we shouldn't have said, and hopefully we learn from that. We also have wisdom that comes from the Scriptures. Wisdom isn't just knowing these things, it's putting it into practice. As we know, with all of God's Word, it's meaningless unless we put it into practice. So God gives us this knowledge as well as the wisdom, the understanding. And if we don't know, we can go back to Him and say, God, I'm not sure what to do in this situation. Help me to do what is right. Help me to do your work and not my own. I have a few proverbs here, and this can kind of become confusing, but again, we have to use our wisdom. Proverbs 26, in the same chapter, it seems to contradict itself. The writer of the proverb here. Verse 4 in Proverbs 26 says, do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him. And maybe if you're in an argument with somebody who is ridiculous, they're just arguing for the sake of argument, if you try to win that argument, you're going to look like a fool. So it's better not to say anything. And verse 5 says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. So there is a time to give an answer, to stand up and say something, to clarify the truth. But it takes wisdom to understand that. Verse 12 in the same chapter in Proverbs 26 says, do you see a man wise in his own eyes? And this is where the trouble comes in. This is the testing that happens for us. Are we acting according to our own wisdom or according to the wisdom of God? The writer of the proverb finishes this statement by saying there is more hope for a fool than for him. There's more hope for a fool, because a fool will just keep his mouth closed so nobody knows he's a fool until he opens his mouth. But somebody who acts according to the wisdom of their own eyes rather than the wisdom of God, it's better off to be a fool and just keep your mouth closed. And so our wisdom is often tested that way, often by our actions, our mouths, our willingness to trust God. Now this time in life, Joseph was 30 years old. He started off, he was 17, he's growing, he's maturing, and he's being given more prestige, more power, more position, the second highest position in all the land, probably the land surrounding Egypt as well. I mean, they had their own kings and their own issues, but he was giving prestige, and God is even giving him the wisdom so that the people might survive. And now comes another test, a great test for Joseph in his life. Genesis chapter 42, verse 6. So we see Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. So people came from all over Egypt and the other lands to buy grain because they had saved up grain for 7 years. And now there was a famine. Now Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Just as God had predicted through those dreams. It happened just that way. Now they don't know who he is. They didn't recognize him. It had been a while. He was a little bit older. And he looked like an Egyptian rather than a Hebrew. And we even find out that he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he didn't reveal who he was. So he's speaking the Egyptian language, and he has an interpreter speaking Hebrew to them. Verse 7 says that he acted roughly to them and strange to them so that they wouldn't find out. But in the midst of this, there's this temptation potentially to buy in on this power, this pride. Really, this is a test of Joseph's pride. Joseph's pride is being tested. Is he going to let that power go to his head and take vengeance upon his brothers who they wanted him killed and they sold him off? Thankfully, he saw God's hand in all of this. his dreams were fulfilled, and he didn't take vengeance on his brothers. He did play with them a little bit. I think he was hoping that they'd learn a lesson. But also he wanted to draw in the whole family. So in his way, he was doing that. This was the test of Joseph's pride. Pride can cause people to do all sorts of things that they wouldn't normally do when pride creeps in. I've seen that. I've seen people, be put in a position, and they begin to be filled with pride, and that position goes to their head. And then they ruin it. They ruin things. They start going according to their own wisdom rather than the wisdom of God. I think King Saul is a great example of that. Pride went to his head. So Joseph's pride was tested here, and he passed the test, even though his brothers had plotted to kill him. He realized that God, if God wanted them punished, he would do it. But he had kept them alive, and he even allowed Joseph the ability to help keep his family alive by having this grain, preserving them. Let me see, we should read some of this story. We'll skip ahead, and we see that Joseph, he gives them grain, they go home, he asks them to bring back their brother, their younger brother, and eventually they find out who he is. He brings him in. Let's see, in chapter 43, verse 27. Then he asked them about their well-being and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" And they answered, "Your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves. So again, that prophecy was being fulfilled. Then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his younger brother, his only full brother, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Now he sees that if he would have been harsh, he probably wouldn't have met his brother or seen his father again if he let that pride go to his head. And it says that in verse 30 that his heart yearned for his brother, and he had to go away so he didn't cry too soon. He hadn't revealed himself yet. Chapter 45, verse 1, Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go away from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He revealed himself. And he explains to his brothers as they're trying to apologize. They realized that they'd done something wrong, and they're wondering if God was going to imprison them in Egypt because of what they did to Joseph. They wept aloud in verse 2, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" His brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." So they came near, and they're still worried. They're worried that he's going to punish us. He said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance." So we see God's hand working with Joseph to save his people, that he would turn into a greater nation. It would birth even the Messiah, Jesus the Christ. Now God brought them in there so that he could save their lives and also demonstrate his salvation on a grander scale. But if Joseph had been prideful, if he would have held on to that position rather than holding on to the will of God, it would have been ruined. Or God would have done it a different way. Maybe his family would have died and God would have started over with it. Some other relative or something. I don't know. That's just my speculation. Now for us, our pride is often tested. It's tested when we have so often even just a little bit of responsibility. Sometimes pride goes to our head. Sometimes it's within our own family, within the congregation, or at work, interacting with people. Pride can go to our head. It's so easy to do. And we have to remember that God has greater plans and can use us for his greater plans if we don't give in to pride, if we instead remain humble, teachable, able for God to use us. So our pride is tested. Pride inhibits us from building relationships as well, from loving one another, from taking care of each other. Most especially, it inhibits our relationship with God. If we're too proud to humble ourselves before God, how can we possibly communicate with Him? How is He going to dwell within us if we resist Him through pride? How often do we need to set ourselves aside, our own will, take care of the needs of others, take care of the needs that God has given us to take care of, God's own desires, letting go of selfishness and pride. God's thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways, but we're learning His ways. And most importantly, our pride is tested when we find out we're wrong, when we sin. Do we repent and change? Humble ourselves. Now, at the end of the story here, we've seen that Joseph passed the test. He actually had 6 tests, probably more, but we've identified 6 today. His loyalty to God was tested. His loyalty to his own integrity before God was tested. His faith was tested. Did he have faith that God was going to bring him through and give him those promises that he had prophesied? His level of kindness was tested, even in a difficult place. His patience was tested. He was held in prison longer than he could have been. His wisdom was tested. Was he going to use God's wisdom or try to use his own wisdom? And ultimately, his pride was tested. And God used his humility to preserve his family, to preserve his own people. And he made Joseph this great ruler in all the land. What a blessing it was. These tests are for us too. All the time, our loyalty is tested. Our wisdom is tested. Our faith, our kindness, our patience, and our pride. If we stay close to God, humbly, we can pass these tests, just like Joseph did. I encourage you to read through that story. You can read all the details. It's very fascinating. And we see God's hand working the whole time, testing Joseph, refining him. And he kept passing that test. And we can too, with God's help.